Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Tony Golding, a Senior Director for Technical Marketing at Delina. Tony, thank you for joining us.
Hey, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
So, federal agencies have made significant progress in adopting ICAM, or Identity, Credential, and Access Management, which is the foundational pillar of zero trust. But the journey is ongoing. Agencies are working through really complex challenges, whether it's technical, operational, or cultural. So, to start us off, could you talk about where agencies are at today in their ICAM journey and maybe some of the progress they've made so far?
Yeah, so the journey it's something that's very prescriptive. I think if we all look at zero trust, if we look at ICAM, then it focuses on some very specific areas of focus. So as the name implies, ICAM, identity, credential, access management, these are all elements of identity security that are common throughout ICAM, throughout zero trust, throughout other types of regulations and frameworks as well. And they really get to the root of some of the problems that we're trying to solve with ICAM and with zero trust, which is, how do we mitigate our risk of identity-based attacks, compromising systems, compromising identities? So the good news is that there's been a lot of identity security solutions available from several vendors, including Delinea, for decades now. And they continue to evolve, they continue to improve, they continue to get better. And as you might imagine, they continue to react to more modern attempts at subverting our security, such as the use of AI. But fundamentally, they revolve around three key elements that are called out in ICAM and zero trust. And those are the use of MFA, specifically phishing resistant MFA, eliminating standing privileges. So the whole tenet of least privilege is a real core element of ICAM and of zero trust. And then there's the ongoing monitoring and authorization. So I think that organizations, this is not a one-time thing. It's not a flick of a switch. It's not an overnight set of controls that people put in place. It is a journey, but the nice thing is that there's lots of best practices on how to evolve that journey in a sensible fashion and mature their identity security to align with the principles of ICAM and of zero trust. And there's a lot of evidence to say that people are doing this successfully. Agencies as well as commercial entities that we deal with, they are deploying zero trust solutions and controls successfully, and they're making great strides in using those to help reduce the risk of identity-based attacks. I can go into a little more detail on those three elements that I think are the core tenets of zero trust and ICAM. So I can do that either now or later on in the discussion.
Yeah, we can talk about it a little later on. I wanted you to maybe highlight some of the successful examples in terms of how well agencies or an agency is doing in terms of modernizing ICAM.
Yeah, modernizing ICAM, I mean, it really does refer back to what I was talking about, things like phishing resistant MFA. So using things like PIV or CAC or FIDO2, these are, hardware devices in order to better assure the identity of the user. I think that ICAM, as well as OMB guidance, the M2209 policy, it calls out the use of phishing resistant MFA directly. It expects agencies to make it the primary factor where practical. And we're seeing a lot of examples of agencies that are successfully implementing this. The CISA guidance says that any form of MFA is better than no MFA, but in a perfect world and really aligning with the spirit and the direction of the OMB, for example, and as well as CISA and ICAM, it means that you've really got to try hard to get this MFA in place. But there are challenges, and I think you alluded to that maybe a little earlier with things like cultural challenges, system challenges, legacy applications, etc. Some apps, some use cases may not allow the implementation of phishing resistant MFA. So there may be constraints like temporary contractors where you just can't You can't do a full PIV-CAC onboarding, very easily if they're temporary contractors or if you're trying to deploy into legacy systems or remote devices or older apps that simply can't accommodate tokens, for example. Those are scenarios where, organizations are employing pretty much across the board a migration plan in order to, maybe replace or migrate their applications, their systems to more modern systems that can accommodate phishing-resistant MFA. And of course, cost, logistics, there's an element of that in doing that, because you're going to have to spend money in order to do it. You're going to have to update processes, but it is a path that the majority of the organizations that we deal with are actually taking. And then the other one is eliminating standing privilege. And as I said, this is a core tenet of zero trust of ICAM, and that implies removing any persistent administrative high risk access. And some of that can be very, very, well, I was just about to say can be very simple to do. I mean, the devil is in the details, right? But, the first step towards doing that is being able to discover the identities that are in the infrastructure. And, once you've discovered those identities in the infrastructure, then you can make a policy decision as to whether or not they should even exist. So eliminating unnecessary high privileged identities is often the first step, because every identity is essentially a vector of attack. And so by eliminating unnecessary privileged identities, privileged accounts, you can reduce your attack surface. You can actually shrink that down. And that helps along the lines of eliminating standing privileges. We see lots of examples of agencies, especially when they're using Linux and Unix environments, where the administrators will create local privileged accounts just for convenience, right? They're just using them to log in quickly, get the job done. They have full administrative rights. Not a great idea when it comes to risk avoidance and aligning with these policies and these programs. So the first step is eliminating those that are unnecessary, and then allowing the administrator to use their existing identity. So they may have an AD account, for example. That becomes the only account that they will use, and it needs to have minimum rights. So then the third thing is that you then give them the ability to elevate their privileges when they need to elevate their privileges, so for a legitimate administrative purpose. So those are kind of three of the key things that we're seeing agencies make tremendous strides in deploying those types of controls to enable that to happen, to reduce the attack surface, to reduce standing privileges, and basically to reduce risk.
Yeah, a lot of progress, and there is a lot to dive into.
Oh, there is.
One thing that I wanted to go back to is you mentioned guidance from OMB and CISA. Could you go back to that and maybe talk to some recent changes that federal leaders should be paying attention to when it comes to ICAM?
Yeah, so some of the new things in the guidance from the OMB and CISA, again, it's coming back to the enforcement of, well, I think I use the term enforcement maybe a little too strongly, because as I've already mentioned, there's a lot of legacy systems still around. People can't overnight adapt to the guidance or the regulations that are published. But the phishing resistant MFA, the elimination of standing privilege, and the continuous monitoring, I didn't really mention much about that. Those, I think, are the three things that have been brought into the guidance from the OMB and CISA that the agencies really need to address. We've already talked about phishing resistant MFA. It's almost like table stakes now, the ability to enable MFA. But one of the key things is that a lot of agencies are becoming multi-cloud. So they've got resources that may be on premise, they may be in a single cloud or in multi-cloud. So it's incumbent on vendors such as Delinea, identity security vendors, to make sure that they can actually apply MFA controls consistently throughout their infrastructure, wherever that infrastructure happens to be. Again, it could be in multi-cloud environments. So that's really important. The other one was the elimination of standing privilege, which I kind of already spoke about. But The third one I would say is this continuous monitoring, because you're not just doing a single point in time. You're not just logging somebody in with a credential and maybe a token and say, okay, that's great, we validated them and they're off to the races. So the other element is really about that continuous monitoring and continuous authorization. So no more kind of point in time checks. You want to move more towards an evidence-driven ongoing verification. And a lot of that guidance, by the way, is coming from NIST. So what's been around forever is NIST SP 800-53. And so, that specifies various control families, which the audience may be familiar with. There's the identity and access, there's the auditing, there's the access and control, various different control families. And so you need to make sure that you implement an identity security solution that can support each of those control families when it comes to continuous monitoring. So, for example, we've actually been very successful in enabling our customers, both agencies and commercial, because our solution generates a stream of identity and access and privilege access signals. So things like elevation request. And elevation is important because if you're doing least privilege, then you've got to give legitimate administrators the ability to elevate privilege just in time, sort of when it's necessary to do that. And so we need to generate signals based on that. So events. So whether it's on workstations, whether it's on servers, instead of these kind of one-time logs that typically require manual review, you want to have these signals generated so they could be exported, for example, to a SIM tool, Security Information Event Management, kind of SOC, so that it can enrich the data that SOC has and use that to correlate with other signals from other systems in order to have better intelligence. Another area that we found very successful with our customers is session recording. So obviously ICAM and OMB and Zero Trust tends to focus on human users and human identities, but there's also the non-human identities as well. And we'll get to that in a short while. But session recording is really more around the human identities, the human admins who are logging into sensitive systems and performing activities. So we want to be able to record those sessions. One of the biggest problems with that is that you record sessions, hundreds in a day. There's nobody there to review them. Picking through hours of session recordings looking for a needle in a haystack is just untenable. So fairly recently, we introduced AI analysis of that. So we've trained our AI on what to look for in terms of sessions on Windows and Linux systems. And so it can do the heavy lifting of analyzing those session recordings and then flagging where it sees something that could potentially be an indicator of compromise, something anomalous. And so, it could be an elevation attempt where the user shouldn't really be doing it, or creating shadow accounts, which is a common kind of attack methodology, or attempting to add something like a low privileged compromised account or newly created account to an administrative group in order to inherit additional privileges. So things such as that can give these session recordings are gold, but they're never actually reviewed. So this automation can really help in making sure that happens. And then there's things like correlating information. So discovery is a key element of what we're talking about here. You can't manage what you can't see. So discovering identities, their access, their group memberships across multi-cloud environments in identity providers, as well as in your Windows and Linux servers, is very important. But then having built-in intelligence that can string all of that together. So you could, for example, visualize an identity and see the upstream and the downstream accesses and privileges and accounts that are used by that identity. So you get a better sense of, if this identity was compromised, what would be the upstream or the downstream impact to our systems, under those circumstances. And then one other thing I'll mention is just-in-time. So just-in-time access. You really have to have just-in-time access if you're going to enforce the principles of least privilege. So if you take away from your admins the ability to just routinely log in as root or local administrator, you've got to enable them to request access when they need it for legitimate reasons, and then have somebody or something approve that access, grant or deny, for a temporary period of time, and then take that access away again, because that gets you back down to zero standing rights. And so having those kind of workflows, those self-service requests, is critically important. And now some more of the innovation that we're seeing around that is actually, again, I hate to use the term, but it's using AI to help with that situation, because just in time kind of suggests, hey, I need to do this now. But if it has to go through an email-based workflow to somebody to approve, it could take a day or a week, right? So if we have AI in the background that's trained to understand context and signals, and can look at a help desk ticket associated with the access request, and look at that help desk ticket, see why it was opened, and then kind of match that to a rationale that the user has to type in when they're requesting that access, then it can make a decision. Should I grant access to this user or not? And maybe if that access is high risk, then it might defer to putting a human involved in order to do the final kind of grant or deny decision. So hopefully that answered some of your question there.
Yeah, no, again, a lot to get into. And like you said, we will get
Tons.
to non-human identities in a little bit. Hopefully, we'll have time. But I wanted to ask you a quick follow-up on AI analysis that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk about some advantages that your clients are getting from, or advantages that you're seeing your clients are getting from that AI analysis?
Yeah. It's kind of early days because, I think if you go to any trade show, you'll see AI plastered everywhere. So you've got to kind of sort out the wheat from the chaff. It could be just a marketing messaging. You've got to really look at it and see if there's any real substance behind it. I like to call some of the AI that we're working on as being, it's tangible AI. It's stuff that actually performs a function that gives you value back. And there's a lot of dynamics around this. So there's the fundamental, how can we use AI to help us do things better? But then there's the other aspect of AI, which I don't think we're going to get into, which is a lot more customers are being asked to make sure that the AI in solutions that they license is built according to certain best practices and principles. How is it trained? Is the data is customer data or agency data being used? Right? Is it externally visible? Things like that. But back to the AI and the values, we tend to use AI for the benefit of our agency customers in two ways. One is AI to help with protecting their assets. At the end of the day, we're identity security, and so we want to make sure that we give them better controls, better security controls. And so I kind of mentioned one of them already, which was the use of AI to analyze automatically and in real time even session recordings, right? Because that's such a gold mine of information when it comes to identifying potential anomalies or anomalous activity that's happening currently. So that's an example of where AI can contribute to those controls. And the other one is building AI into our solutions. So it's kind of less of a security benefit, more of a productivity benefit. And productivity is hugely important in these systems, right? I mean, identity security with its history in privileged access management, or PAM, it's historically been hugely complex and requires a lot of time and care and feeding and attention. So the more we can apply automations to the process and help with elements like productivity, then the better it's going to be for our customers. Obviously, the session recording analysis actually does help with productivity as well. And as I mentioned also, when it comes to just-in-time access requests, the use of AI to do that authorization-based analysis is also a benefit. We're using AI as well internally to try and detect anomalous activity, more of an end-to-end. So instead of looking at one silo of systems or controls, like, someone's logged into a Linux box and maybe they do something weird. Well, we want to be able to see the full session, whether, they came in through a portal, they came into the vault, they tried to check out an administrative password from the vault, they tried to use that to log into a Windows server, they couldn't, but they managed to log into a different system, and from there they tried to go laterally to other servers. We want to use AI to string together all of the various alerts from all of those different systems into a more end-to-end context-based case. So when an investigator comes in, look, they've been alerted to the potential of a breach or an attack, they can open up a case that combines all of those different alerts together in one place. So that helps with incident response. It also helps with, when you're looking at chain of custody and stuff like that during investigations. So that's another area where AI is being used to improve things. And there's going to be more. I mean, we're on the bleeding edge here of AI and the benefits within an identity security context. That there's going to be more of this for sure.
Yeah, Tony, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I have so many follow-up questions and topics that I wanted to dive into. But before we wrap up, could you briefly talk about maybe looking ahead what agencies should prioritize over the next 12 months? And also maybe you could highlight what you're working on.
Yeah, well, you probably guess we're doing a lot with AI because we feel the benefits are there. AI is not just for the attackers, it's for the defenders as well. And it can help us level the playing field tremendously there. So I'll just leave that as it is. But I think one of the important things for agencies to consider is not to fall into the typical historical trap of trying to solve the identity security related problems that they need to solve to be aligned with ICAM and zero trust and zero standing privileges and NIST and all of these things, not to fall into the trap of trying to cherry pick best of breed parts of that solution. I believe it's really, really critical to embrace a platform, a modern SaaS identity security platform that is built for the cloud, built in the cloud. So it's not a lift and shift of old products trying to get them to work in a SaaS fashion, but it's actually natively built to take advantage of some of the benefits of the cloud. And that means that problems can be solved much more quickly. You're probably working with a platform and a set of identity security solutions that are based on containers and microservices that make it easier for the vendor to upgrade and update and fix. And it's also then easier for the agency to adapt, adopt, and deploy. And of course, if it's a SaaS, then they're not managing the bulk of that stack anyway. So that eases things for the agency. So that would be my recommendation.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
I wish we had more time to dive into a lot more topics that we discussed
Yes.
next time. I'd like to thank today's guest, Tony Golding, a Senior Director for Technical Marketing at Delina. I'm Anastasia Obis, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Industry Exchange Cloud.